The Ganges River begins high in the mountains, where the air is thin and cold, and snow covers the peaks throughout the year. The water that will eventually become the river starts as ice and snow, accumulated over centuries in glacier that rest among the rocky heights of the Himalayas. These glaciers are ancient, formed from snowfall that compressed over time into dense ice, holding within them the memory of countless winters. The ice moves slowly, creeping downward under its own weight, and at the lower edges, where the temperature is just warm enough, the ice begins to melt. This melting happens gradually, drop by drop, as the sun warms the surface and the ice releases its water back into the liquid form. The water trickles from the glacier's edge, forming small streams that flow over rocks and through narrow channels carved into the mountainside. These streams are clear and cold, carrying with them fine particles of rock and sediment that have been ground down by the glacier's movement. The streams join with other streams, and as they do, they grow wider and deeper, merging into larger flows that continue their descent from the high peaks. The sound of the water is constant, a gentle rushing that echoes against the stone cliffs and fills the mountain valleys with a soft, continuous murmur. As the water moves downward, it passes through different zones of elevation, each with its own character and temperature. In the highest reaches, the landscape is bare and rocky, with little vegetation to soften the terrain. The water here is fast-moving, tumbling over boulders and cascading down steep slopes in a series of small waterfalls and rapids. The force of the water shapes the rock, wearing it smooth in some places and carving deep channels in others. Over thousands of years, the water has created a pathway through the mountains, following the natural contours of the land and seeking the easiest route downward. Lower down, the slopes become less steep, and the water begins to slow. Trees appear along the banks, first in small clusters and then in larger groups, their roots reaching down to the water's edge. The presence of vegetation changes the character of the stream, providing shade that cools the water and shelter for small creatures that live along the banks. Birds nest in the branches overhead, and insects hover above the water's surface, their movements creating tiny ripples. The water itself is still clear, though it carries more sediment now, the particles suspended in the flow giving it a slightly clouded appearance when viewed closely. The streams continue to merge, and eventually they form a river that is recognizable as such, with defined banks and a steady flow that moves through the landscape in a winding path. This river passes through valleys where the land opens up, and the surrounding peaks form a distant backdrop. The valley floors are covered in grass and wildflowers during the warmer months, and the river meanders through this landscape in broad curves, its path determined by the slope of the land and the resistance of the soil and rock beneath it. The river carries with it not just water, but also nutrients and minerals that have been dissolved from the rocks it has passed over. These substances are invisible in the water, but they are present nonetheless, enriching the river and making it capable of supporting life. Small fish swim in the slower sections, where the current is gentle enough for them to navigate without exhausting themselves. They feed on insects and tiny organisms that live in the water, and in turn, they provide food for larger creatures, including birds that hunt along the riverbanks. As the river continues its journey, it passes through regions where the climate is warmer and the landscape is more varied. The mountains give way to foothills, and the foothills give way to plains, and throughout this transition, the river remains a constant presence, flowing steadily onward. The water level changes with the seasons, rising during the months when snow melts rapidly in the mountains and falling during the drier months when the snow melt slows and the rains are less frequent. These seasonal variations are predictable, following a rhythm that has repeated for thousands of years. The river passes through forests where the trees grow tall and dense, their canopies forming a green ceiling overhead. The light that filters through the leaves is soft and dappled, creating shifting patterns on the water's surface. The forest is home to many creatures, some of which depend on the river for their survival. Deer come to the water's edge to drink, stepping carefully on the muddy banks and lowering their heads to the cool water. Monkeys move through the trees, their calls echoing through the forest, and occasionally they descend to the riverbank to search for food or to drink. The river also flows through open landscapes where the land is cultivated, and fields stretch out on either side. These fields are green during the growing season, planted with crops that depend on the water the river provides. Farmers have used the river for irrigation for countless generations, digging channels that carry water to their fields and allow them to grow food even in areas where rainfall alone would not be sufficient. The river's water is essential to this process, and the timing of its seasonal rise and fall influences when crops are planted and when they are harvested. Villages and towns are built along the river's banks, their presence marked by clusters of buildings and the smoke that rises from cooking fires. The people who live in these places have a close relationship with the river, using it for drinking water, for washing, and for transportation. Small boats move along the river, carrying people and goods from one place to another, their progress slow and steady as they navigate the current. The boats are simple, often made of wood, and they sit low in the water, rocking gently with the river's movement. The river is wide in some places and narrow in others, its width determined by the shape of the land through which it flows. In wide sections, the water moves more slowly, spreading out across a broader channel and creating shallow areas where the riverbed is visible beneath the surface. In narrow sections, the water is deeper and faster, confined by the banks and forced to move more quickly. These variations create different habitats within the river itself, each one supporting different types of life. Fish are abundant in the river, ranging from small species that live near the surface to larger ones that dwell in the deeper waters. These fish have adapted to the river's conditions, able to navigate its currents and find food in its waters. Some fish migrate along the river, moving upstream during certain seasons to spawn and then returning downstream afterward. This movement is driven by instinct, a pattern that has been repeated for generations, ensuring the continuation of their species. The river also supports a variety of birds, many of which depend on it for food. Herons stand motionless in the shallow water, watching for fish to swim within reach. When they spot their prey, they strike quickly, their long beaks darting into the water with precision. Kingfishers perch on branches overhanging the river, their bright plumage a flash of color against the green foliage. They dive into the water to catch fish, emerging with their catch held firmly in their beaks before flying back to their perch to eat. Turtles bask on rocks and logs that protrude from the water, their shells warming in the sun. They are slow-moving creatures, spending much of their time in the water but coming ashore to rest and to lay their eggs. The turtles are ancient, their species having existed for millions of years, and they have a calm, unhurried presence that matches the peaceful flow of the river. When they are disturbed, they slide back into the water with barely a splash, disappearing beneath the surface to safety. The river's water is used by countless people for bathing and washing. In the early morning, before the heat of the day sets in, people come to the river's edge to bathe, the water cool and refreshing against their skin. They cup the water in their hands and pour it over themselves, the simple act of washing becoming a daily ritual that connects them to the river. Clothes are washed in the river as well, scrubbed against rocks and then laid out on the banks to dry, the fabric fluttering gently in the breeze. The river has a spiritual significance for many people, seen as more than just a source of water but as something sacred and life-giving. Pilgrimages are made to certain points along the river, where people gather to perform rituals and to immerse themselves in the water. These gatherings happen throughout the year, but they are particularly common during certain festivals and holy days. The atmosphere at these times is one of quiet reverence, with people standing in the water, some praying, some simply being present, letting the river flow around them. The water itself is believed by many to have purifying qualities, capable of cleansing not just the body but the spirit as well. This belief has been held for thousands of years, passed down through generations, and it shapes the way many people interact with the river. The water is collected in containers and taken to homes and temples, where it is used in ceremonies and kept as a reminder of the river's presence. This connection between the river and the spiritual life of the people who live near it is deep and enduring, woven into the fabric of their daily existence. Along its course, the river passes through cities, some of them ancient, their history stretching back thousands of years. These cities have grown up around the river, their development closely tied to the water's presence. The river provides transportation, water for drinking and irrigation, and a place for trade and commerce. Markets are held near the riverbanks, where merchants sell goods brought from distant places, the river serving as a highway that connects different regions and facilitates the exchange of goods and ideas. The architecture of these cities reflects their long history, with old temples and buildings made of stone standing alongside newer structures. The temples often face the river, their steps leading down to the water's edge, creating a direct connection between the sacred spaces and the river itself. The steps, called ghats, are worn smooth by the feet of countless people who have descended them over the centuries. The ghats are used for bathing, for ceremonies, and simply for sitting and watching the river flow by, a place where people can pause and reflect. The river continues its journey through the plains, where the land is flat and the river's pace slows. Here, the river splits into smaller channels and branches, creating a complex network of waterways that spread across the landscape. These smaller channels are called distributaries, and they carry water to areas that would otherwise be dry. The presence of these distributaries creates a rich, fertile region where agriculture thrives and where many communities make their homes. The soil in these areas is enriched by the sediment the river carries, which is deposited on the land during the seasonal floods. When the river rises, it overflows its banks and spreads across the floodplain, leaving behind a layer of silt that replenishes the soil's nutrients. This natural process has made the land highly productive, capable of supporting multiple crops each year. Farmers depend on these floods, timing their planting to take advantage of the newly enriched soil. The river also supports wetlands and marshes, areas where the water moves slowly or stands still, creating a unique habitat for specialized plants and animals. These wetlands are covered in grasses and reeds that grow tall and dense, their roots anchored in the waterlogged soil. The reeds sway gently in the wind, creating a soft rustling sound that blends with the occasional calls of birds. Waterfowl are common in these areas, wading through the shallow water in search of food. Ducks, egrets, and storks are among the many species that make these wetlands their home, either permanently or during certain seasons as part of their migration routes. The river's delta, where it finally reaches the sea, is a vast and complex landscape. Here, the river splits into many channels, each one winding through the flat terrain and eventually emptying into the ocean. The delta is a place of transition, where fresh water meets salt water, creating a brackish environment that supports a different set of species than those found upstream. Mangrove trees grow in some parts of the delta, their roots extending into the water and providing shelter for young fish and other marine creatures. The tides influence the delta, causing the water level to rise and fall throughout the day. At high tide, salt water pushes upstream into the delta channels, mixing with the river's fresh water. At low tide, the fresh water dominates, flowing out to the sea and carrying with it sediment and nutrients that nourish the coastal waters. This daily cycle creates a dynamic environment where conditions are constantly changing, and the creatures that live here must be adaptable to survive. The delta is also an important area for fisheries, with many communities depending on the fish and shellfish that live in its waters. Fishermen venture out in small boats, casting nets and setting traps to catch their daily harvest. The work is steady and rhythmic, guided by knowledge that has been passed down through generations. The fishermen know the best times to fish, the places where certain species are most likely to be found, and the signs that indicate changing conditions. The river's journey from the mountains to the sea is a long one, covering hundreds of miles and passing through many different landscapes and climates. Along the way, it provides water for millions of people, supports countless ecosystems, and shapes the land through which it flows. The river is both ancient and ever-changing, its course slowly shifting over time as it erodes banks in some places and deposits sediment in others. The water that flows in the river today is part of a cycle that has continued for eons, with water evaporating from the ocean, falling as rain or snow in the mountains, and then flowing back to the sea through the river. The river's flow varies throughout the year, responding to the seasonal patterns of rain and snowmelt. During the monsoon season, when heavy rains fall across much of the region, the river swells, its volume increasing dramatically. The water level rises, and the river becomes wide and powerful, carrying with it enormous amounts of sediment and debris. Trees and branches that have fallen into the water are swept along by the current, tumbling and turning as they make their way downstream. The river's color changes during this time, becoming brown and murky with the suspended sediment, a visible sign of the erosion happening upstream. As the monsoon rains taper off and the dry season begins, the river's flow decreases. The water level drops, and the river becomes narrower, revealing sandbars and rocky sections that were hidden during the high water. The exposed banks dry out, their surfaces cracking under the sun's heat. The rhythm of the river slows, and the water becomes clearer as the sediment settles. This is a time of renewal for the riverbed, with new patterns forming in the sand and silt, and with aquatic plants taking root in the shallower areas. The seasonal changes bring different activities along the river. During the dry season, when the water is low, people wade into the river to fish or to collect water in containers. Children play in the shallow areas, splashing and laughing, their voices carrying across the water. Animals come to the river more frequently during this time, as other water sources dry up, and the river becomes a vital lifeline for the wildlife in the surrounding areas. During the wet season, when the river is high, the focus shifts to managing the excess water and protecting against flooding. Embankments and levees are maintained to keep the water from spreading too far across the floodplain, and people monitor the river's level closely, ready to move to higher ground if necessary. Despite these precautions, flooding does occur, and when it does, it can inundate large areas, covering fields and sometimes even reaching into villages and towns. The floods bring challenges, but they also bring the sediment that enriches the soil, and over time, people have learned to adapt to this cycle, accepting both the benefits and the difficulties it brings. The river is home to several species of dolphins, creatures that have adapted to life in fresh water. These dolphins are smaller than their ocean-dwelling relatives, with long, slender snouts and flexible bodies that allow them to navigate the river's murky waters. They use echolocation to find their way and to locate prey, emitting clicks and listening for the echoes that bounce back from objects in the water. The dolphins are often seen surfacing briefly to breathe, their smooth gray backs breaking the surface before they dive back down into the depths. The dolphins move in small groups, communicating with one another through sounds that are mostly inaudible to human ears. They hunt for fish in the river, working together to herd their prey into tight groups before striking. The dolphins are shy and elusive, often avoiding areas where human activity is heavy, but in quieter sections of the river, they can sometimes be observed going about their daily routines, their presence a reminder of the river's richness and diversity. The river also supports crocodiles, large reptiles that bask on the banks during the day and hunt in the water during the cooler hours of evening and night. These crocodiles are well adapted to the river's environment, able to remain submerged for long periods and to move swiftly through the water when pursuing prey. They feed on fish, birds, and occasionally larger animals that come to the river to drink. The crocodiles are powerful predators, but they are also patient, often waiting motionless for hours until an opportunity presents itself. The presence of crocodiles adds an element of caution to life along the river. People who live nearby are aware of the crocodiles and take care when approaching the water, especially in areas where the reptiles are known to be common. Despite the potential danger, crocodiles are also respected as part of the river's ecosystem, and in some places, they are protected to ensure their populations remain stable. The river's banks are lined with trees in many areas, providing shade and habitat for numerous species. These trees have deep roots that stabilize the soil and prevent erosion, holding the bank in place even when the river's current is strong. During the hot months, the shade from these trees offers a respite from the sun, creating cool areas where people and animals can rest. The trees also drop leaves and branches into the water, which decompose and provide nutrients for aquatic organisms, contributing to the river's overall health. Certain trees that grow along the river are considered sacred by many people, and they are often decorated with cloth and offerings. These trees become focal points for small rituals and prayers, with people pausing to pay their respects as they pass by. The practice of honoring these trees is an old one, reflecting a deep connection between the natural world and the spiritual beliefs of the communities that live along the river. The river passes through several large cities, each with its own character and history. In these urban areas, the river is both a resource and a challenge. It provides water for millions of people, but it also receives waste and pollutants from the city's activities. Efforts are made to manage this impact, with treatment plants and regulations aimed at reducing pollution, but the sheer scale of human activity means that the river in these areas is often stressed. Despite this, the river continues to flow, its water moving steadily downstream, carrying with it the traces of the cities it has passed through. In the early morning and late evening, the riverbanks in the cities come alive with activity. People gather for morning prayers and bathing, while others engage in exercise, walking or jogging along the paths that run parallel to the river. Vendors set up stalls selling tea, snacks, and flowers, and the smell of incense drifts through the air. The atmosphere is one of quiet energy, with people going about their routines in a rhythm that has been established over many years. Boats are a common sight on the river in the cities, ranging from small wooden rowboats to larger vessels used for transportation and commerce. The boats move slowly, their progress measured and unhurried, navigating the river's currents with practiced ease. Ferries carry passengers from one bank to the other, providing a vital link in the city's transportation network. The rhythmic sound of oars dipping into the water and the gentle creaking of wood create a soothing backdrop to the visual bustle of the riverfront. Bridges span the river at intervals, connecting different parts of the cities and allowing people and vehicles to cross without needing a boat. These bridges vary in design, some old and ornate, others modern and functional. They are gathering places as well as thoroughfares, with people stopping to lean on the railings and watch the river flow below. The view from a bridge offers a unique perspective on the river, revealing its width and the patterns of its current, and providing a moment of pause in the midst of the city's activity. The river's influence extends beyond the immediate areas along its banks. The water drawn from the river is transported to distant neighborhoods and villages, distributed through a network of pipes and channels. This water is used for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and irrigation, supporting life and activity far from the river itself. The river thus becomes a lifeline that reaches into many areas, its presence felt even where it cannot be seen. The river's ecosystem includes countless microorganisms, invisible to the naked eye but essential to the river's health. Bacteria and algae live in the water, breaking down organic matter and producing oxygen through photosynthesis. These tiny organisms form the foundation of the river's food web, supporting the small invertebrates that in turn feed the fish and other larger creatures. The balance of these microscopic communities is delicate, influenced by factors like temperature, nutrient levels, and the presence of pollutants. During the warmer months, algae can bloom in certain sections of the river, turning the water a greenish color and creating dense mats on the surface. These blooms occur when conditions are favorable, with ample sunlight and nutrients allowing the algae to reproduce rapidly. While some algae are beneficial, excessive growth can deplete oxygen levels in the water, affecting fish and other aquatic life. The blooms eventually subside as conditions change, and the river returns to its more typical appearance. The river carries stories and memories, not just water and sediment. For the people who live along its banks, the river is a constant presence, marking the passage of time and the changing seasons. Families have lived in the same villages for generations, their lives intertwined with the river's rhythms. The river has witnessed celebrations and hardships, births and deaths, and through it all, it has continued to flow, unchanged in its essential nature even as the world around it has transformed. Old songs and poems speak of the river, describing its beauty and its power, its role in daily life and its spiritual significance. These words are passed down from one generation to the next, keeping alive a cultural connection to the river that goes beyond practical considerations. The river is not just a resource but a part of identity, a symbol of continuity and belonging. The river's journey includes stretches where it flows through protected areas, places where the natural environment is preserved and human activity is limited. In these areas, the river and its surroundings are allowed to exist much as they have for thousands of years, with minimal interference. The vegetation is lush and diverse, and wildlife is abundant. These protected stretches serve as refuges for species that have become rare in more developed areas, and they provide opportunities for people to experience the river in a more pristine state. Walking along the river in these protected areas, one can hear the sounds of the natural world more clearly. Birds call from the trees, insects hum in the grass, and the water itself makes its gentle rushing sound as it flows over rocks and around bends. The air is fresh and carries the scent of vegetation and damp earth. The experience is one of peace and connection, a reminder of the river's original character before extensive human development. The river's water temperature varies depending on the season and the location along its course. In the mountains, where the water is freshly melted from snow and ice, it is cold, almost numbingly so. As the river descends and flows through warmer regions, the water temperature rises, becoming more comfortable for swimming and bathing. In the delta, where the river meets the sea, the temperature is influenced by both the river's flow and the ocean's currents, creating a mix that changes throughout the day. The river is subject to changes in water quality, influenced by natural processes and human activities. Sediment from erosion, nutrients from decaying vegetation, and minerals dissolved from rocks all contribute to the river's natural chemistry. Human activities add to this, with agricultural runoff, industrial discharge, and urban waste all finding their way into the river. Monitoring and managing water quality is an ongoing challenge, requiring cooperation among governments, communities, and organizations. Despite the challenges, the river remains resilient, its flow continuing year after year. The river has survived ice ages and droughts, floods and earthquakes, always finding a way to adapt and persist. This resilience is a testament to the river's fundamental strength, its connection to vast systems of weather and geology that operate on timescales far longer than human lifetimes. The river's course has changed over the millennia, shifting its path as the land around it has risen and fallen. Old riverbeds, now dry, can sometimes be found at a distance from the current channel, evidence of the river's former paths. These ancient channels are often filled with sediment and covered with vegetation, but their shape remains visible in the landscape, a subtle reminder of the river's long history. The river's influence on the climate of the surrounding region is significant. The presence of such a large body of water moderates temperatures, keeping the areas near the river cooler in summer and warmer in winter than they would otherwise be. The river also contributes moisture to the atmosphere, which can influence local weather patterns and rainfall. This climatic influence extends beyond the immediate riverbanks, affecting a broader area and contributing to the overall conditions that support agriculture and human settlement. At night, the river takes on a different character. The sounds of daytime activity fade, replaced by the nocturnal calls of creatures that emerge after dark. Frogs croak from the banks, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic chorus. Insects buzz and click, and occasionally the splash of a fish breaking the surface can be heard. The water reflects the moonlight when the sky is clear, creating a silvery path that stretches across the river's surface. The movement of the water causes the reflection to shimmer and dance, a gentle, hypnotic sight that draws the eye. People who live along the river often speak of its presence with a sense of familiarity and affection. The river is a neighbor, a companion, something that is always there, providing a sense of stability and continuity. Children grow up playing along its banks, learning to swim in its waters, and listening to stories about the river from their elders. This connection is passed down through generations, creating a living tradition that keeps the river at the center of community life. The river's banks are sometimes lined with flowers during certain seasons, with wildflowers blooming in colorful clusters. These flowers attract butterflies and bees, which move from blossom to blossom, gathering nectar and pollen. The sight of the flowers against the backdrop of the river and the surrounding landscape is one of simple beauty, a moment of visual pleasure that requires no explanation or analysis, just appreciation. The river supports not only life but also livelihoods. Fishermen depend on the river for their catch, which they sell in local markets to support their families. Farmers use the river's water to irrigate their fields, growing crops that feed communities near and far. Boatmen transport goods and passengers, their work connecting different places and facilitating trade. The river is thus woven into the economic fabric of the region, its value measured not just in water volume but in the countless ways it enables people to live and work. The river has inspired countless works of art, from paintings and sculptures to music and literature. Artists have sought to capture its essence, its movement and stillness, its power and tranquility. Writers have used the river as a metaphor for life itself, with its continuous flow representing the passage of time and the journey from birth to death. These artistic expressions reflect the deep impression the river makes on those who encounter it, its presence leaving a mark on the human imagination. The river story is one without a clear beginning or end. It has always been here, in one form or another, and it will continue to flow long after the present moment has passed. The water that fills the river today will eventually reach the sea, evaporate into the atmosphere, and fall as rain somewhere else, beginning the cycle anew. This endless circulation is part of a larger system that encompasses the entire planet, connecting the river to distant oceans and far-off mountains. As the river flows, it carries with it particles of sand and silt, fragments of rock and organic matter, all moving downstream toward the delta and the sea. This sediment is the product of erosion, the slow wearing away of the land by water and wind and ice. The sediment gives the river its color and substance, transforming it from clear water into a fluid that is thick with the material of the earth itself. This material will eventually settle, building up in layers on the riverbed or being deposited on the floodplain, where it will enrich the soil and support new growth. The river passes through regions where the culture and language change, yet the river itself remains a constant, recognized and valued by all the communities along its course. Different names may be used for the river in different places, reflecting the linguistic diversity of the region, but the river's identity is unmistakable. It is the same body of water, flowing continuously from the mountains to the sea, a unifying presence in a landscape of diversity. The river's surface is rarely still. Even in the calmest sections, there is always some movement, a subtle current that keeps the water flowing forward. This movement is driven by gravity, pulling the water downhill, and by the river's own momentum, the accumulated force of all the water upstream pushing the flow onward. The river does not rest, does not pause, but continues its journey day and night, through all seasons and all weather. The river's presence can be felt even when it cannot be seen. The sound of the water carries through the air, audible from a distance, a reminder that the river is nearby. The vegetation that grows more lushly near the river's banks signals the presence of water, even in areas where the river itself is hidden from view. The river shapes the landscape in subtle ways, influencing where people build their homes, where roads are constructed, and where fields are planted. The river has been mapped and studied, its course charted and its characteristics measured. Scientists have analyzed its water, measured its flow, and documented the species that live in and around it. This knowledge has practical applications, helping to manage the river's resources and to understand the challenges it faces. Yet even with all this study, the river retains an element of mystery, a sense that there is more to it than can be captured in data and measurements. The river flows through time as well as space, connecting the past with the present and the future. The water that flows today is the same water that has been flowing for thousands of years, renewed and recycled through the hydrological cycle. The river has been a witness to history, its banks the site of ancient civilizations and the setting for countless events that have shaped the region. The river continues to flow, indifferent to human history yet intimately connected to it, providing the essential resource that has made human settlement possible. As evening falls, the light on the river changes, becoming softer and more golden. The shadows lengthen, and the contrast between light and dark becomes more pronounced. The river's surface takes on the colors of the sky, reflecting the oranges and pinks of sunset. Birds fly low over the water, heading to their roosting places for the night, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. The day's activities wind down, and a sense of calm settles over the river and its surroundings. The river continues its steady flow, moving through the darkness with the same persistence it shows in daylight. The water does not stop, does not tire, but keeps moving forward, pulled by the inexorable force of gravity and the momentum of its own mass. In this way, the river is a symbol of constancy and endurance, a reminder that some things continue regardless of human activity or awareness. The river story is told not in dramatic events but in the accumulation of countless small moments, each one adding to the whole. A fish rising to the surface, a leaf floating past, a ripple spreading from a stone dropped in the water, all these moments together create the river's ongoing narrative. It is a story without climax or resolution, a continuous unfolding that has no need for an ending. The river is there in the morning when the light returns, its surface catching the first rays of sun and reflecting them back into the world. The cycle begins again, the daily rhythm of light and shadow, warmth and cool, activity and rest. The river participates in this rhythm, its flow continuing, its presence constant, a living thread that connects the mountains to the sea, the past to the present, the earth to the sky.